In the summer of 1980, a quiet Bavarian village near the Black Forest began whispering about a woman who seemed torn from a fairy tale. Pale skin, jet black hair, and lips as red as blood. Locals called her Blutige Schneewittchen, the Blood Snow White. But she wasn't the innocent princess from children's books. Men who crossed her path disappeared without a trace. A farmhand walking home from the disco. A student passing through on holiday. A villager who left the tavern and never returned. Each sighting ended the same way, gone, with no body ever found. Some believed she was a murderer hiding behind beauty. Others swore she was something far older, a spirit of the forest reborn in modern times. What no one could deny was the fear she left behind. This is the story of the Blood Snow White. And if you enjoy dark legends and unsolved mysteries, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more chilling stories. To understand the legend of the Blood Snow White, we need to step back into West Germany in the early 1980s. The country was still divided by the Berlin Wall, and tension from the Cold War hung heavy in the air. Yet, in the southern regions near Bavaria and Baden-Württemberg, life felt almost timeless. Villages were small, deeply Catholic, and bound together by tradition. Everyone knew each other's names, and strangers were noticed quickly. The Black Forest loomed over many of these communities, vast, dark, and ancient. Its pines and firs blocked out the sun, and the forest floor stayed damp even in summer. Generations grew up on Grimm's fairy tales, many of which were born in this very region. For locals, the idea of curses, witches, and wandering spirits wasn't just folklore, it was part of cultural memory. Old stories lingered, passed down around kitchen tables and at village festivals, and they shaped how people explained the unexplainable. But this wasn't a sleepy or innocent time. West Germany in the 1980s had its shadows. There were kidnappings that shocked the nation, like the tragic case of Ursula Herrmann in 1981. A child buried alive in a box. There were high-profile terrorist attacks from the Red Army faction, which had everyone suspicious of strangers. And in rural areas, stories of hitchhikers who vanished without a trace were whispered like cautionary tales. In small villages near the Black Forest, the line between rumor and reality was thin. If someone disappeared, people didn't immediately think of random crime or city gangs. They turned instead to stories of cursed women, hungry spirits, or warnings wrapped in folklore. Against this backdrop, when men began vanishing between 1980 and 1983, the villagers didn't just see tragedy. They saw a pattern. The descriptions unsettled everyone. Witnesses spoke of a beautiful woman, pale, almost too pale, with unnaturally black hair, and lips so red they looked painted. Some said she wore an old-fashioned dress, others insisted it was modern clothing, but all agreed she seemed out of place. Men, especially those walking home late at night, were the ones who vanished after speaking to her. And in villages already steeped in cautionary tales, it didn't take long for the nickname to emerge, Blutige Schneewittchen, the Blood Snow White. A name that connected her to childhood fairy tales, but twisted into something darker, something predatory. The timing only fueled the legend. The world outside was unstable. The Cold War, kidnappings, terrorism, and inside these villages, fear had to be explained. And what better explanation than a figure from legend stepping into reality? The Blood Snow White became the lens through which locals understood their fear. This was the setting. A Germany caught between modern threats and old folklore, where every shadow in the forest could hide a story, or a killer. The first disappearance was easy to dismiss. In July of 1980, a farmhand named Lucas never returned home after a night at the village disco. Friends assumed he had gone to another town, maybe chasing work or adventure. His bicycle was later found leaning against a fence at the edge of the woods, but there was no sign of him. A few months later it happened again. This time it was a university student passing through the region on a summer hiking trip. He was last seen talking to a dark-haired woman outside a roadside guest house. Witnesses recalled how striking she looked, pale as chalk, lips like red paint, almost too perfect. When police retraced his steps, they found his backpack tossed into a ditch, but no trace of the student himself. By the spring of 1981, whispers had grown louder. A local man named Matthias disappeared walking home from a tavern less than 2 kilometers from his house. His boots were discovered neatly placed at the edge of a logging path, as if he had removed them himself. But the strange part, his socks, still damp from the night's dew, led into the forest and then abruptly stopped. No tracks beyond that point. No body was ever found. The disappearances shared disturbing similarities. Most of the men vanished between late night and early morning, usually alone, often after drinking or social gatherings. Several were seen with the same mysterious woman, described in almost identical terms by different witnesses: unnaturally pale, with black hair and red lips, and a gaze that seemed to follow you even when she stood in the shadows. Other odd details began surfacing: a jacket smeared with blood found on a roadside fence, a pocket knife bent as though by tremendous force. A witness swore she saw a woman in a long, dark dress vanish into the mist near the forest edge. Police explained these away as coincidence, drunken stories, or the work of opportunistic criminals. But for the villagers, the pattern was undeniable. By 1982, the legend was no longer a rumor. It had become a living fear. Parents warned sons not to walk home alone. Tavern owners started closing earlier. Travelers were told never to stop if they saw a woman by the roadside, no matter how helpless she looked. The case that solidified the legend came in 1983, when 2 men vanished within the same month. Both were last seen in different villages. Both had been approached by a woman who matched the same description, and both disappeared within sight of the Black Forest. It was as if the forest itself had swallowed them whole. The villagers began to speak openly. This wasn't a coincidence, and it wasn't human. This was the work of Blutige Schneewittchen, the Blood Snow White. The legend of the Blood Snow White didn't exist in a vacuum. What made it so convincing to locals was how it seemed to echo real cases that shook West Germany in the same years. People weren't just telling ghost stories. They were connecting her to headlines that were all too real. Take the case of Ursula Herrmann in 1981. She was only 10 years old when she vanished while riding her bicycle home along a forest path near Lake Ammersee, not far from Munich. Days later, investigators discovered she had been placed in a wooden box buried underground. The air holes were too small, and she suffocated before rescuers could ever find her. The horror of a child dying, hidden beneath the soil of a forest, struck a nerve across the country. For villagers near the Black Forest, it felt like proof that the woods could swallow lives whole, just as the legend warned. That same year, another chilling disappearance made the news. Catrice Lee, a 2-year-old British girl, vanished from a supermarket near a military base in Paderborn. One moment she was with her mother, the next she was simply gone. No witnesses, no clues, no body. To this day, her case remains unsolved. Though she was a child, not a grown man, her vanishing without explanation fed into the fear that in 1980s Germany, people could be there one moment and gone the next. Then came the Yogdsee case in 1984. One of the strangest mysteries in German crime history. A food engineer named Günther Stoll became convinced they were after him. He scribbled the cryptic letters Yogdsee on a piece of paper before leaving his home in panic. Hours later, he was found mortally injured in his crashed car. Witnesses claimed to see strangers near the vehicle, but nothing was ever proven. His death was ruled suspicious, and theories ranged from organized crime to secret agents to something unearthly. To the villagers who already feared the Blood Snow White, Stoll's paranoia sounded eerily like someone who had caught a glimpse of her and paid the price. Each of these cases was real, documented and unsolved for years. Yet when told around kitchen tables or whispered in taverns, they became woven into the legend. People didn't separate fact from folklore, they blended them. Every unsolved disappearance, every unexplained death, every child gone without a trace became another brick in the story of a bloodthirsty woman haunting the Black Forest. By the mid-1980s, the Blood Snow White wasn't just a village myth. She was the explanation for West Germany's darkest mysteries. When the disappearances began piling up, local police were forced to respond. But their approach was practical, grounded in paperwork and procedure, not legends. To them, talk of a pale woman with blood-red lips was nothing more than hysteria. In Lucas's case, the farmhand who vanished after the disco in 1980, investigators noted his history of drinking and speculated he might have drowned in the river nearby. When a search turned up nothing, the file quietly shifted into the category of missing, presumed runaway. The student who disappeared the following summer was treated differently. Because he wasn't local, police suggested he had continued traveling and simply never contacted his family. The only unsettling clue, his abandoned backpack in a ditch, was explained away as theft. By the time Matthias vanished in 1981, locals were furious. His boots had been found neatly placed on a forest path, but his tracks ended suddenly in the undergrowth. Officers suggested wild animals or environmental conditions had obscured the trail. Villagers scoffed, "Animals don't make footprints disappear." In several cases, strange fragments of evidence appeared, only to muddy the waters further. A jacket stained with what looked like blood was tested, but results were inconclusive. A bent pocket knife was dismissed as damaged during use. In another instance, a young woman claimed she saw a pale stranger vanish into the mist, but police brushed her off as unreliable. Behind the scenes, some investigators did raise questions. Could these disappearances have been the work of a single offender, a serial killer targeting isolated men? Yet without bodies, without definitive crime scenes, and with Cold War paranoia already running high, superiors hesitated to pursue such theories. Officials suggested alternative explanations: drunk men wandering off, accidents in the forest, or even foreign spies preying on vulnerable targets near the border. To the villagers, this dismissive attitude only deepened suspicion. They didn't see coincidences or drunken accidents, they saw a pattern. And every time the authorities failed to explain the vanishings, the legend of the blood Snow White grew stronger. By 1983, files were stacking up, but evidence remained thin. No bodies were recovered, no arrests were made, and every official explanation rang hollow. The police had their reports, their typed statements, their stamped folders. The villagers had something more primal: a name, a face, and a story they could not forget. To them, the case wasn't unsolved. It was clear: the blood Snow White was real, and she was still out there. By the mid-1980s, the blood Snow White was no longer just a whisper. She had become a living myth, a story that stretched beyond one village and began creeping through the entire Black Forest region. What began as a handful of disappearances turned into tavern talk, roadside warnings, and bedtime cautions for children. Parents began telling their sons not to walk home alone after dark. Hitchhiking, once common in rural West Germany, became less popular in the villages touched by the stories. Travelers who stopped in the wrong town might be warned in hushed voices: "If you see a woman by the roadside with black hair and red lips, don't stop." No matter what, stories of sightings multiplied. A truck driver swore he saw her on a foggy highway shoulder, waving for help, but when he slowed, she vanished in the rearview mirror. Teenagers claimed she appeared on forest paths, asking for directions in a voice that was too calm, too perfect. Hunters told of finding footprints in fresh snow that stopped suddenly, as if the person had evaporated into thin air. Folklore blended with fear. In one village, locals tied her to an older tale of a jilted bride who was said to have died in the woods a century earlier, cursed to walk forever in search of men to lure into her grave. In another, she was linked to medieval witch trials. A woman burned alive, her spirit returning in the form of a false Snow White, beauty masking vengeance. Even outside Germany, the story spread. A few small newspapers in the region ran articles about phantom hitchhikers and missing men, though they never named the blood Snow White directly. Travelers carried the tale home, telling friends of the beautiful woman who haunted the Black Forest. The legend had taken root just as firmly as any of the Grimm brothers' tales. For many, the legend explained what the police could not. Instead of accidents or runaways, villagers believed there was an entity with intent, whether human killer or something supernatural, preying on those who strayed too far into the night. By the end of the decade, sightings still surfaced, though the disappearances slowed. The blood Snow White was no longer only a story of missing men. She had become a warning, a symbol of the dangers that hide in beauty, and a reminder that some fairy tales end in blood. By the early 1990s, the wave of disappearances seemed to taper off. No new names were added to the whispered list of men who had vanished after crossing paths with the mysterious woman. Some villagers claimed this was because people had grown cautious. No one dared walk home alone at night. No one stopped for strangers on the roadside anymore. Others suggested the Blood Snow White had simply moved on, choosing another village, another country, another hunting ground. But the fear never fully disappeared. Every time a traveler went missing in southern Germany, people would ask, was it her? In the newspapers, there were reports of hikers vanishing in the Black Forest, bodies never recovered. Though authorities chalked them up to accidents, locals saw them as proof that the legend hadn't ended at all, only gone quiet. The strangest part was the absence of closure. Unlike most crime sprees, there were no arrests, no confessions, no explanations. The police files remained stamped unsolved. And because there were no bodies, no final answers, the villagers were left with nothing but their stories. For some, those stories were evidence of a serial killer clever enough to hide every trace. For others, they were evidence of something unearthly, a figure walking straight out of Grimm's fairy tales into the modern world. The few who claimed to have seen her after the disappearances ended described the same haunting image. A pale woman with red lips, waiting by the roadside, staring silently until you blinked, and she was gone. Whether these were real encounters or just the imagination fueled by decades of fear, no one could ever say for certain. What makes the legend endure is the silence, the lack of explanation, the gaps where facts should be. In true crime, we are taught to look for evidence, for motive, for cause and effect. But in this story, there is only absence. Absence of the men, absence of answers, and an enduring presence of fear. The Blood Snow White never confessed, never revealed herself, never left behind a trace that could be explained. She remains a question mark. And in that space, the legend only grows stronger. Even now, some say if you walk the Black Forest roads after midnight, you might still see her. A pale woman in the dark, lips the color of blood. Watching, waiting. And so the story of the Blood Snow White lingers, caught between crime and folklore, history and nightmare. Was she a clever killer who used beauty as her weapon? A ghostly remnant of Germany's darker past? Or nothing more than fear woven into legend, shaped by a community desperate to explain the unexplained? The truth may never be known. What remains are the names of the missing, the silent police files, and the whispers that still echo through the Black Forest. Perhaps she was real. Perhaps she was only a story. But stories have power, and this one refuses to die. So the next time you walk a dark road alone, or pass a stranger whose smile feels just a little too perfect, remember the warnings from 1980. Not every fairy tale ends with happily ever after. Some end with blood. If you enjoyed this story and want more chilling legends and unsolved mysteries, don't forget to like this video, share it with friends, and subscribe for the next dark tale.